FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
We, as a country, we are incredibly good at exporting our pathologies. We teach other countries to do what we do. And the fact of the matter is that the models for culling out journalists are playing out in countries around the world. They have not played out to such an extent in Australia. But I want to emphasize, they will. If you don't believe that, you are living in a fantasy world. Because someday a manager is going to show up and say, you know, we could do this with half of as many journalists. If they have, I know that in some cases they already have. But I want to emphasize why I think it matters so much. And that is that if we were just talking about journalists losing their jobs, right? That's a bummer. It's sad. I'm a journalist. My friends are journalists. I don't want us to lose jobs. But that's not really what we're talking about here. You know, that's sad, journalists losing jobs. Media changing, that's tough, that's difficult, you know, that's complicated. But those are business page stories, right? The front page story, the real news for society, is what this does to democracy. And this is not an American phenomenon. It is not a developed world phenomenon. Journalism is intricately linked to democracy in every place in the world. There's nowhere where journalism isn't the underpinning of democracy. Now, journalism may be practiced in many different ways. Online, in print, broadcast. It may be still an oral tradition. Journalism was rooted in the oral tradition. But the bottom line is, when someone gets information that power doesn't want and communicates it to the powerless, they are committing the act of journalism. And when we dramatically decrease the number of people who do that act in a country, we dramatically decrease the ability of citizens to get the information they need. Thomas Jefferson, our third president, author of our Bill of Rights, or author of our Declaration of Independence, said it best. There's a wonderful quote that's above the door of every newspaper in America. It says, given the choice between having government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I would always choose the latter. I'd always choose the newspapers because you can't have a democracy, you can't have a free society without the newspaper. Now, you'd think from that quote that Jefferson loved newspapers. He hated them. He despised them. He said after he left the White House that if he never read another newspaper for the rest of his life, he would be a happy man. So why would he say we have to have them? What is it? Well, because if you read the rest of the letter saying given the choice between government and newspapers, it was to his friend of his named Edward Carrington. He says, because the only thing that will separate us from the monarchies of old Europe is a free press, is journalism. Because in the monarchies of old Europe, kings and viscounts and kaisers and czars controlled information. And in that control of information, they assured that the wolves would always devour the sheep. And Jefferson, being very literal, said, let me explain that to you, Edward Carrington. What I mean when I say the wolves would devour the sheep, I am not talking about animals. I am saying the rich will control the poor. There will be a class divide, Jefferson explained it, in every country in the world, and that divide will be dramatically reinforced to an extent that there will be no real democracy without journalism.